There are moments when the ground yields a secret so profound that it forces us to rewrite everything we thought we knew about the human story. These are the finds that shatter our modern arrogance, reminding us of the brilliant, violent, and deeply complex civilizations that walked the earth long before we arrived. Join us as we count down the 10 most shocking historical discoveries that left the world entirely in awe. We begin our journey with a heavy slab of black stone that gave a voice back to the pharaohs. Part 1. Echoes from the dust and the key to the pharaohs. In the year 1799, the blazing Egyptian sun beat down on the scorched sands as Napoleon Bonaparte's military forces marched across the desert. His soldiers were fighting a bitter war, but they were unwittingly standing directly on top of unimaginable, buried majesty. French engineers under the command of Pierre-François Bouchard were tasked with rebuilding an old fort near the coastal town of Rosetta. It was a mundane, exhausting job in a completely grueling and hostile environment. Amidst the rubble and the choking dust, a soldier's shovel violently struck a solid block of granodiorite. They dragged the heavy object out into the harsh daylight, wiping away the dirt to reveal a massive slab measuring 114 centimeters by 72 centimeters. The stone was entirely covered in strange, meticulous, and deeply carved inscriptions. They did not know it at the time, but these weary soldiers had just unearthed the Rosetta Stone. For centuries, the majestic temples and soaring obelisks of Egypt had stood entirely silent. The language of the ancient Egyptians, the intricate and beautiful hieroglyphs, had become a dead and hopelessly unreadable code. Brilliant scholars and seasoned historians had stared endlessly at these elaborate carvings, completely unable to decipher the epic stories, the fervent prayers, and the dire warnings left behind by a fallen empire. The knowledge of an entire civilization was locked away, seemingly lost to the endless march of time. But the Rosetta Stone was the ultimate, undeniable master key. The carved text on this rough-hewn rock was not just one language, but 3 distinct scripts stacked upon each other. The top section featured the highly mysterious and sacred Egyptian hieroglyphs. The middle section contained Demotic, the everyday, functional script of the common Egyptian people. The bottom section was written in clear, legible Greek. Because scholars could already read ancient Greek, the path forward suddenly became incredibly clear. It was a race to decode the impossible, culminating in the brilliant work of French linguist Jean-François Champollion. By painstakingly matching the known Greek names to the corresponding hieroglyphic cartouches, Champollion finally cracked the code that had baffled humanity. The translation of this single artifact sent an absolute shockwave through the global academic community. It was a monumental, earth-shattering breakthrough that single-handedly birthed the modern field of Egyptology. Suddenly, the walls of the pyramids and the grand columns of Luxor were speaking directly to us across thousands of years. We could finally read the glorious names of the kings and queens, understand their deeply complex mythology, and grasp the sheer magnitude of one of the world's earliest and most powerful superpowers. The Rosetta Stone definitively proved that the past was not permanently erased, but merely waiting for the right moment to be understood. It set the stage for an explosive wave of archaeological fever, a desperate global rush to uncover what else the shifting sands of Egypt were hiding. And as we will soon see, the unforgiving desert was holding on to legendary treasures far more glittering than black stone. Part 2. The Golden Slumber of the Boy King. The blistering heat of the Egyptian desert had broken the spirits of countless previous explorers. For decades, the Valley of the Kings had been scraped, dug, and plundered by tomb robbers and wealthy European aristocrats alike. The general consensus among the elite archaeological community was that the valley was completely exhausted. They believed there was nothing left but dust, broken pottery, and the looted echoes of once great pharaohs. But a stubbornly determined English archaeologist named Howard Carter refused to accept defeat. He was convinced that one tomb remained hidden beneath the shifting sands, the resting place of a relatively obscure young ruler named Tutankhamun.
One last chance.
Carter's unrelenting obsession was funded by the wealthy Lord Carnarvon, but patience and money were rapidly running out. In the year 1922, Carnarvon had officially reached his absolute limit. He gave Carter funding for one final, desperate expedition. The pressure was immense, a heavy, suffocating weight on Carter as he ordered his weary crew to excavate a small, seemingly unremarkable patch of debris near the tomb of Ramses VI. The workers hacked away at the compacted earth, sweating under the unforgiving sun, chasing a ghost that everyone else said did not exist. Then, the miraculous happened. A single stone step was uncovered in the bedrock. As the crew feverishly cleared the rubble, a descending staircase emerged, leading deep into the cool, dark earth. At the bottom of those stairs stood a sealed doorway, bearing the unbroken royal seal of the necropolis guards. Carter's heart pounded in his chest. This was not a plundered ruin. This was an intact tomb. When Lord Carnarvon finally arrived from England to witness the breach of the tomb, the tension in the subterranean corridor was incredibly thick. Carter nervously chipped a small hole in the top corner of the sealed doorway. He inserted a candle, peering inside. For over 3,000 years, the pitch-black darkness of the chamber had been entirely untouched by human eyes. Hot air escaped from the room, causing the candle flame to flicker wildly and casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. Carnarvon, standing anxiously behind him, asked if he could see anything. Carter's legendary response was a breathless whisper of absolute awe. He said he saw wonderful things. When the wall was finally dismantled, the sheer, blinding scale of the discovery brought the seasoned explorers to their knees. The antechamber was packed to the ceiling with an overwhelming collection of treasures that defied imagination. There were dismantled chariots glittering with gold, beautifully carved alabaster vases, strange animal-shaped couches, and life-sized sentinel statues guarding the deeper chambers with an imposing, silent vigilance. But the true, heart-stopping masterpiece was waiting in the burial chamber itself. Nestled within a series of nested, gilded shrines and heavy stone sarcophagi lay the mummy of the boy king. Covering his head and shoulders was the iconic, solid gold death mask of Tutankhamun. The mask was a breathtaking work of ancient craftsmanship, weighing over 20 pounds, inlaid with lapis lazuli, quartz, and obsidian. It stared back at the intruders with a serene, immortal gaze. Over 5,000 individual artifacts were painstakingly catalogued and removed from the cramped chambers. The sheer financial value of the hoard was staggering, estimated at over $1 billion in modern currency. But the historical and cultural wealth was infinitely more valuable. The discovery provided an unprecedented, intimate look into the complex burial practices and the staggering opulence of the Egyptian royal court. We saw their jewelry, their weapons, and the items they believed were necessary to conquer the afterlife. In the modern era, the unveiling of Tutankhamun continues to capture the public imagination. It dominated international newspaper headlines and ignited a frantic, worldwide obsession that influenced art, architecture, and fashion. Throughout antiquity, the boy king had been largely forgotten by his own people, but he eventually achieved a level of fame and immortality that the greatest conquerors could only dream of. Yet, as the golden treasures of the pharaohs traveled the globe, another groundbreaking secret was waiting quietly in the arid, unforgiving cliffs of the Middle East. It was a discovery that would fundamentally challenge the foundations of the world's most powerful religions. Part 3. Sacred Whispers from the Desert Caves. The landscape around the Dead Sea rests under a blinding sun. It is a hostile environment, characterized by jagged, baked rock and arid, unforgiving sands. In 1947, a Bedouin boy named Mohammed Ed-Deeb was searching for a lost goat in this forbidding territory. He navigated the rugged cliffs above the water and tossed a rock into an unlit cave, expecting to hear the satisfying thud of striking the cave wall or perhaps a startled animal making an escape. Instead, he heard the sharp, shocking sound of breaking pottery echoing out of the darkness. Inside, the boy had found ancient jars containing rolls of old, brittle leather wrapped carefully in linen. The initial impact of the discovery was subdued, but as scholars slowly became aware of what these manuscripts were, a frantic and intensive search throughout the region was triggered. They spent the next decade combing the caves near Qumran and eventually extracted over 900 separate manuscript fragments, kept remarkably well preserved due to the dry, stable climate in the caves. Some of these manuscripts had not seen the light of day for practically 2,000 years. This dramatic unearthing sent absolutely massive shockwaves throughout religious and historical circles all over the world. These texts, eventually known universally as the Dead Sea Scrolls, provided an incredibly detailed window into life, religious practices, and the profound theological developments occurring during the turn of the millennium. Before the scrolls emerged from the dirt, the oldest known existing copies of the Hebrew Bible were from the Middle Ages. The Dead Sea Scrolls contained passages that were an astonishing 1,000 years older than those medieval copies. It presented a tangible and direct link to antiquity that profoundly deepened humanity's understanding of early Jewish religious practices and beliefs. They revealed ancient laws, community rules, apocryphal works, and fervent hymns that provided an unbelievably detailed context to a pivotal era of history. Scholars continue to tirelessly analyze the Dead Sea Scrolls today. The discovery definitively confirmed that the great biblical texts had been remarkably preserved as they were transmitted through many hundreds of years of complex history. However, as scholars pored over the ancient words contained within those dry caves near the Dead Sea, another expedition was gearing up thousands of miles across the ocean, preparing to unearth long-held secrets hidden deep under the suffocating canopies of an entirely different kind of wilderness. Part 4. The hidden sovereign of the jungle. The impenetrable rainforests of Central America hold their secrets with a suffocating, almost violent grip. Towering mahogany trees and thick, winding vines swallow massive stone pyramids, erasing the monuments of kings and completely devouring the echoes of a once dominant empire. The civilization of the Maya thrived in this unforgiving landscape, building sprawling, sophisticated cities with power structures driven by fierce warfare, deep religious devotion, and absolute, godlike authority. For generations, explorers believed that this absolute power was wielded exclusively by men, by warrior kings who commanded the armies and ruled from the high temples. But the dense jungle was hiding a revelation that would completely shatter that assumption and redefine our understanding of Maya royalty. In the year 1993, an ambitious team of archaeologists was hacking their way through the oppressive heat and humidity of Guatemala. They were excavating the ruined city of Huachactun, a site famous for its sprawling astronomical observatories and towering stone pyramids. The work was absolutely grueling, with the crew constantly battling relentless insects, venomous snakes, and the sheer, exhausting weight of the tropical climate. They were digging deep into the foundation of a collapsed temple when they suddenly struck a hollow cavity. It was an untouched, sealed burial chamber. As the heavy stone slabs were carefully shifted aside, the stagnant, damp air of the tomb escaped into the outside world. The team shined their flashlights into the pitch-black void, illuminating a breathtaking scene of unimaginable wealth and silent, enduring power. For exactly 1,500 years, the occupant of this sacred tomb had rested in absolute, undisturbed darkness. The skeletal remains were surrounded by an absolute fortune in magnificent treasure. There was exquisitely painted pottery depicting scenes of courtly life, alongside incredibly intricate jade carvings that symbolized life and divine authority. Heavy, beautifully crafted royal regalia adorned the body, indicating a ruler of the absolute highest order, someone who commanded total reverence from the people of Huachactun. But as the archaeologists painstakingly analyzed the remains and the surrounding artifacts, a stunning truth emerged from the dust. The bones did not belong to a king. The ruler buried with such overwhelming reverence and unimaginable wealth was a woman. The discovery of the tomb of the Maya queen was an absolute seismic shift in the world of archaeology. It proved, without a shadow of a doubt, that women could and did hold ultimate, supreme power in the highly complex and often brutal political landscape of Mesoamerica. She was not merely a ceremonial figurehead or a forgotten wife. The staggering amount of jade and the commanding placement of her tomb indicated that she was a sovereign, a dominant political force who ruled over a thriving, wealthy metropolis. Her existence challenged every preconceived notion about gender roles and power dynamics in that region. Furthermore, the walls of the tomb and the exquisite pottery were covered in pristine, highly detailed inscriptions. During the classic era of the Maya Empire, scribes recorded their history using a deeply complex system of hieroglyphic writing. These newly discovered glyphs provided a massive, crucial breakthrough for linguists and historians. The inscriptions found inside the Queen's resting place offered vital clues that helped scholars crack the code of the Maya language, allowing them to finally read the grand, epic histories of the cities, the brutal records of their wars, and the sacred lineages of their rulers. The hidden sovereign of the jungle had not only rewritten the rules of power, but she had also handed humanity the dictionary needed to understand her people. Her royal tomb illuminated the staggering wealth and sophistication of a society that flourished deep within the rainforest. Yet, halfway across the world, an entirely different kind of ruler was preparing for the afterlife in a manner that defied all logical explanation, commanding an immortal force of clay and fire. Part 5. The Emperor's Immortal Vanguard. The sprawling, dusty plains of Shanxi province were cracking under the weight of a brutal drought. In the spring of 1974, local farmers from a small village outside of Xi'an were desperately searching for water to save their dying crops. They gathered their shovels and began to sink a well into the dry, red earth, hoping to strike a hidden aquifer. Instead, about 15 feet down, a farmer's spade struck something hard. It was not a rock, and it was certainly not water. It was the haunting, lifelike face of a soldier made entirely of baked clay, staring blindly out of the dirt. They had accidentally stumbled upon the perimeter of a staggering subterranean world, a ghostly military encampment that had been waiting in absolute silence. For over 2,200 years, an entire army had been standing at attention in the pitch-black darkness beneath the soil. When word of the discovery reached Beijing, archaeologists descended on the site and began to carefully peel back the earth. What they found completely defied human logic and historical precedent. This was not a simple tomb. It was a sprawling, subterranean military garrison covering over 14 square miles. Row upon row of life-size terracotta warriors emerged from the dirt, arranged in perfect, disciplined battle formations. There were heavily armed infantrymen, kneeling archers, commanding generals, and full-sized cavalry horses pulling intricate wooden chariots. Over 8,000 individual figures were eventually uncovered, each one positioned to ruthlessly defend their master in the realm of the dead. During the 3rd century BC, the geopolitical landscape of East Asia was forever altered by a single, terrifyingly ambitious ruler. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, was a man consumed by an insatiable thirst for absolute power and a crippling fear of his own mortality. He had successfully conquered and unified the warring states through brilliant, brutal military campaigns, establishing an empire of unprecedented scale. But his ultimate enemy was death itself. Because he could not conquer the grave, he demanded that his sprawling military apparatus follow him into the afterlife. The Terracotta Army was the ultimate projection of his imperial might, a physical manifestation of a command structure so absolute that it required an entire workforce of over 700,000 laborers to construct. The sheer level of craftsmanship on display is absolutely staggering. Every single soldier was uniquely designed. The artisans did not use molds for the faces. Instead, they sculpted individual portraits, complete with distinct facial hair, varied expressions, and specific ethnic features representing the diverse corners of the newly unified empire. The armor was incredibly detailed, with painted clay mimicking overlapping leather plates and bronze rivets. At the time of their creation, these phantom soldiers were painted in vibrant, intimidating colors, holding real, razor-sharp bronze weapons that were still lethal when archaeologists unearthed them. The Terracotta Army remains one of the most magnificent and terrifying displays of autocratic power ever discovered. It is a monument to an emperor who refused to lay down his sword, even in the darkness of the grave. But while this immortal vanguard was buried intentionally to project strength, our next journey takes us to a bustling metropolis that was buried by a sudden, apocalyptic catastrophe, freezing its citizens in a final moment of absolute terror. Part 6. Doomsday in the shadow of Vesuvius. The bustling streets of the Roman Empire were a symphony of commerce, politics, and absolute indulgence. Now imagine a thriving, wealthy resort city, a playground for the elite, vibrating with life under the warm Mediterranean sun. This was a place of sprawling villas adorned with vibrant frescoes, crowded marketplaces smelling of exotic spices, and grand amphitheaters echoing with the roar of gladiatorial combat. The citizens went about their daily lives, baking bread, trading goods, and worshipping their gods, completely oblivious to the apocalyptic monster sleeping peacefully right above their heads. The towering peak of Mount Vesuvius cast a long, beautiful shadow over the city, a fixture of the landscape that seemed as permanent and safe as the empire itself. In the year 79, the earth beneath the city violently shuddered, and the sky turned into an absolute nightmare. The mountain did not merely erupt, it detonated with a catastrophic, deafening roar, ripping its own summit apart and hurling a massive column of superheated rock and toxic gas miles into the stratosphere. The sun was instantly blotted out, plunging the terrified population of 20,000 people into a suffocating, pitch-black darkness. A lethal rain of heavy pumice and searing ash began to bury the streets, trapping families in their homes and crushing roofs under its immense weight. Panic consumed the city as people desperately scrambled toward the harbor, choking on the sulfurous air, praying to gods who had seemingly abandoned them. But the worst was yet to come. A massive pyroclastic flow, an avalanche of boiling gas and volcanic debris, cascaded down the slopes of Vesuvius at hurricane speeds, instantly incinerating everything and everyone in its path. The vibrant, roaring heartbeat of the city was silenced forever. For nearly 1,700 years, the city of Pompeii was entirely erased from the face of the earth. It lay buried under millions of tons of hardened volcanic rock and ash, a lost ghost town completely forgotten by the marching centuries. The memory of the tragedy faded into myth, and new towns were eventually built over the rolling hills, their inhabitants unaware of the entombed nightmare resting silently beneath their feet. But history, no matter how deeply buried, eventually demands to be remembered. In the year 1748, a group of explorers and engineers acting under the orders of the King of Naples were surveying the area and began to dig. What they uncovered was not just a collection of ruined buildings, but an extraordinary, chilling snapshot of daily life frozen perfectly in time. As the relentless excavation continued, the sheer scale of the preservation left the world in absolute awe. The devastating ash that had murdered the city had also acted as a miraculous time capsule. Archaeologists unearthed pristine mosaics, perfectly preserved loaves of bread still sitting in stone ovens, and election slogans freshly painted on the walls. They found the tools of craftsmen, the jewelry of the wealthy, and the weapons of the gladiators, all sitting exactly where they were dropped. But the most haunting discovery was yet to come. As the diggers carefully removed the compacted ash, they began to find strange, hollow cavities in the debris. By pouring liquid plaster into these voids, they recreated the exact, agonizing final poses of the victims. Over 1,000 bodies were eventually discovered and cast in plaster. The forms revealed mothers clutching their children, men desperately covering their faces from the toxic gas, and even chained dogs struggling to escape the suffocating heat. These grim, visceral statues provided an intensely personal, heart-wrenching connection to the people who perished. They transformed Pompeii from a mere archaeological site into a deeply human tragedy. The excavation offered an unparalleled, encyclopedic insight into urban architecture and art, making it one of the most studied and visited historical locations on the planet. The ash of Vesuvius had stolen their futures, but it inadvertently granted them a tragic, enduring immortality. Yet, while Pompeii was a real city destroyed by a very real mountain, our next discovery takes us to a place that many believed was nothing more than a beautiful, mythical lie spun by ancient poets. Part 7. Unearthing the Ghosts of Homer.
In this episode,
for thousands of years, the epic tale of Troy was considered nothing more than a magnificent, violent fantasy. The ancient poet Homer spun a sweeping narrative of gods and mortal heroes clashing in a desperate, bloody conflict. For 10 agonizing years, a mythical siege supposedly raged outside the towering, unbreakable walls of a wealthy citadel. It was a story of a beautiful queen stolen away in the dead of night, of a massive wooden horse concealing a deadly army, and of legendary warriors like Achilles and Hector battling to the death. Academic scholars and seasoned historians universally agreed that the Iliad was a masterpiece of literature, a beautiful piece of Greek mythology. They believed with absolute certainty that the sprawling, wealthy city of Troy never actually existed in the real world. But one man fundamentally refused to accept that the greatest story ever told was just a myth. His name was Heinrich Schliemann, a wealthy German businessman turned amateur archaeologist who possessed a borderline dangerous obsession with Homeric legend. In the year 1870, Schliemann arrived on the northwestern coast of Turkey with a copy of the Iliad in one hand and a tremendous fortune in the other. He was searching for a specific landscape described in the ancient poems, a place where two rivers met near the Aegean Sea. His gaze settled on a large, unremarkable mound of dirt and scrub brush known to the locals as Hisarlik. While professional academics openly mocked his blind faith in a poem, Schliemann hired a massive crew of local laborers and began to ruthlessly cut a gigantic trench straight through the heart of the hill. He was not a delicate or careful excavator. He was a man driven by a singular, frantic desire to physically touch the ancient world. And as his workers dug deeper into the earth, the impossible slowly began to emerge from the dust. Approximately 3,500 years ago, a massive and heavily fortified city commanded this strategic hilltop. But Schliemann did not just find one city. As the colossal trench deepened, he sliced through a staggering historical timeline. He discovered the crushed ruins of 9 completely distinct cities, stacked directly on top of one another like a colossal earthen layer cake. Whenever a settlement was violently destroyed by earthquakes, devastating fires, or brutal warfare, the survivors simply leveled the rubble and built a new, grander city right over the bones of the old one. This monumental discovery completely fractured the academic consensus. Schliemann had unearthed massive defensive walls, heavily scorched stones indicative of a catastrophic siege, and a staggering hoard of priceless artifacts. He found beautifully crafted gold jewelry, lethal bronze weapons, and intricate pottery that proved this location was a fabulously wealthy center of power. During the Bronze Age, this citadel would have controlled the highly lucrative trade routes between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. It was a prize worth fighting and dying for, perfectly aligning with the geopolitical motivations hidden beneath Homer's romanticized tale of a stolen bride. Although Schliemann's reckless, heavy-handed digging methods tragically destroyed many crucial historical layers, his sheer, stubborn willpower irrevocably changed the landscape of modern archaeology. He provided the hard, undeniable physical evidence that the legends of the Greek heroes were deeply rooted in a very real, incredibly violent history. He brought the ghosts of Troy back from the realm of poetry and anchored them firmly in the dirt of reality. This spectacular triumph sparked an absolute frenzy of new archaeological investigations, pushing historians to seek out other legendary civilizations that were thought to be lost entirely to myth. But as we leave the battlefields of ancient Turkey, our countdown takes a dramatic turn toward the sea, where a rusted lump of bronze pulled from a shipwreck would completely shatter our understanding of human technological evolution. Part 8. The Impossible Machine of Antiquity. The Aegean Sea is a beautiful but deeply treacherous stretch of water, known for swallowing ships without a single trace. In the spring of 1901, a violent and sudden storm forced a crew of Greek sponge divers to desperately seek shelter near the tiny, rocky island of Antikythera. They dropped anchor and prayed for the churning, angry waves to finally subside. Desperate to salvage their ruined expedition, the captain decided to send a diver down into the deep, crystal-clear waters just off the rugged coast. The diver plunged into the absolute silent depths, wearing a heavy canvas suit and a bulky copper helmet. Upon reaching the dark sea floor, he was met with a scene straight out of a terrifying nightmare. He frantically pulled on his lifeline, and when he was hauled onto the deck, he was babbling in absolute shock about a massive pile of dead, rotting women and horses littering the ocean floor. But they were not corpses. The diver had stumbled upon the wreckage of a massive, heavily laden cargo ship, absolutely packed with magnificent bronze and marble statues that had been violently swallowed by the sea. For over 2,000 years, this sunken graveyard had been resting in the crushing, freezing depths. The Greek government quickly organized a massive, highly dangerous recovery operation. The divers brought up breathtaking sculptures, amphorae, and priceless glass vessels. It was an absolute treasure trove of breathtaking art. But amidst the dazzling, undeniable beauty of the statues, there was a completely unremarkable, corroded lump of bronze and rotting wood. It was entirely crusted over with thick sea sediment and calcified shells. It looked exactly like a piece of worthless scrap metal. The exhausted crew tossed it roughly into a wooden crate alongside the other artifacts, completely ignoring it. A few months later, the salvaged treasures were sitting in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. An archaeologist named Valerios Stais was carefully examining the corroded lump when he noticed something incredibly strange. The crusty rock had split apart as the wood dried out, and hiding inside the fractured stone was a perfectly formed, deeply intricate bronze gear wheel. Stais was completely stunned. This was not a statue or a piece of armor. It was a highly complex mechanical machine. In the ancient world, a device of this nature had absolutely no business existing. Scientists analyzed the 80 surviving fragments using advanced X-ray imaging, discovering a mind-boggling system of over 30 interlocking bronze gears. This was not a simple clock or a crude toy. It was the world's first known analog computer. The user would simply turn a small hand crank on the side of the wooden box, and the internal gears would perfectly calculate and display the exact, complex movements of the sun, the moon, and the 5 known planets across the sky. The machine was so precise that it tracked the highly irregular orbit of the moon using an ingenious pin and slot mechanism that mimicked its variable speed. Decades in advance, the machine could accurately predict both solar and lunar eclipses. Every 4 years, the device even tracked the sacred cycle of the Olympic Games. During the Greek and Roman eras, humanity was simply not supposed to possess this level of extreme, microscopic precision. The gear trains inside the Antikythera mechanism featured differential gearing, an incredibly advanced mechanical concept. Until the 16th century in Europe, historians firmly believed the concept of differential gearing was completely undiscovered by mankind. The sheer, terrifying genius required to design and build this bronze computer proves a deeply profound truth. During the height of classical antiquity, engineers were clearly capable of immense technological marvels that rivaled the complexity of early modern engineering. It forces us to ask a deeply unsettling question. If this brilliant machine was lost to the bottom of the sea, what other astonishing scientific achievements were permanently erased by the fires of war and the brutal collapse of empires? The Antikythera mechanism is a rusted, broken window into an alternative reality. Throughout ancient history, there might have been a brilliant society powered by gears, mathematics, and profound astronomical knowledge. But as we leave the freezing depths of the Aegean Sea, our countdown takes a dramatic turn toward the dizzying heights of the Andes Mountains, where another brilliant civilization built a breathtaking sanctuary literally touching the clouds. Part 9. The Cloud Sanctuary of the Inca. The jagged, emerald peaks of the Peruvian Andes form one of the most unforgiving and beautiful landscapes on the planet. The air is dangerously thin, and the steep, jungle-covered mountainsides plunge vertically into roaring whitewater rivers. It is an environment that actively resists human habitation, a vertical world of mist and stone where mere survival is a daily battle. But high above the sacred valley, hidden completely beneath a thick, choking blanket of cloud forest, lay a sleeping giant. For centuries, local indigenous farmers whispered rumors of a sprawling, ruined stone city sitting silently on a razor-thin mountain ridge. They called it the Old Peak. The outside world, however, remained entirely ignorant of its magnificent existence. The Spanish conquistadors, who had ruthlessly crushed the Inca Empire and plundered their valleys for gold, completely missed this hidden jewel. It remained perfectly preserved, swallowed by the jungle and guarded by the sheer, terrifying drops of the Andean cliffs. Enter Hiram Bingham, an ambitious and highly educated American explorer employed by Yale University. Bingham was obsessed with finding Vilcabamba, the legendary final lost capital of the Inca resistance. In the summer of 1911, Bingham was trekking through the treacherous, rain-soaked Urubamba Gorge. He was exhausted, fighting off dangerous tropical fevers and relying entirely on the guidance of a local farmer named Melchor Arteaga. The farmer casually mentioned some extensive ruins located high up on the mountain above their camp. Bingham, skeptical but desperate for a breakthrough, agreed to make the punishing climb. The ascent was a brutal, terrifying scramble up a nearly vertical, slippery slope, crawling on hands and knees through dense, venomous undergrowth. But when Bingham finally breached the tree line and stepped onto the ridge, the sheer scale of what he saw literally took his breath away. Sitting 2,430 meters above sea level was an absolute architectural masterpiece. Bingham had stumbled upon Machu Picchu. The city was a sprawling, multi-tiered labyrinth of perfectly cut granite temples, royal palaces, and hundreds of cascading agricultural terraces carved directly into the sheer face of the mountain. The jungle had reclaimed much of the stonework, wrapping thick vines around the sacred altars, but the absolute majesty of the site was undeniable. Around the year 1450 AD, the Inca Emperor Pachacuti ordered the construction of this impossible sanctuary. It was not a military fortress, but rather an exclusive, highly sacred royal estate and religious retreat for the Inca elite. The engineering required to build this city in the clouds absolutely defies modern comprehension. The Inca possessed no iron tools, no written language, and they did not use the wheel. Yet, they dragged massive granite boulders weighing up to 50 tons up the precipitous mountain slopes. Using a technique known as ashlar masonry, the builders meticulously carved and polished every single stone to fit together with such microscopic precision that not even a single blade of grass could be inserted between the joints. They used absolutely no mortar. The stones simply locked together, creating structures so incredibly stable that they have flawlessly survived hundreds of catastrophic earthquakes. Every single detail of Machu Picchu was designed in perfect, harmonious alignment with the cosmos. The sacred Intihuatana stone, a beautifully carved pillar sitting at the highest point of the urban sector, functioned as a precise astronomical clock and calendar. During the winter solstice, the priests would symbolically tie the sun to this stone to prevent it from disappearing completely into the sky. The city was a physical manifestation of the profound spiritual connection between the Inca people, the rugged earth, and the heavens above. Bingham's sensational discovery captivated the entire globe, heavily featured in the pages of National Geographic and instantly making Machu Picchu the ultimate symbol of the Inca civilization. Today, this dizzying, breathtaking citadel stands proudly as a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of the new 7 wonders of the world. It is a haunting, beautiful monument to an empire that conquered the impossible heights of the Andes before being tragically extinguished. But as we leave the misty peaks of South America, our final destination takes us back out to the open ocean, where a desperate, fateful voyage would violently crash two entirely isolated worlds together, forever changing the trajectory of human history. Part 10. The collision of two worlds. The vast, terrifying expanse of the Atlantic Ocean was widely considered a completely impassable void. For centuries, European maps simply faded into terrifying depictions of sea monsters and boiling waters at the edge of the known world. The prevailing belief was that sailing straight into the western horizon was an absolute, guaranteed death sentence. But a relentlessly ambitious and deeply controversial Italian explorer named Christopher Columbus was absolutely obsessed with a radically different vision. He believed that the Earth was much smaller than scholars claimed, and that by sailing west, he could establish a highly lucrative, direct trade route to the fabulous wealth of Asia. In the late 15th century, the spice trade was the ultimate economic prize, and the Spanish crown was desperately hungry for a competitive advantage. After years of begging and being outright rejected by multiple royal courts, Columbus finally secured the funding from King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain. He was granted 3 small, utterly fragile wooden ships named the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. In August of 1492, a deeply anxious crew of 90 men pulled up their anchors and sailed out of a quiet Spanish harbor, leaving the absolute safety of the known world completely behind them. For 2 agonizing months, the ships were entirely swallowed by the endless, terrifying blue of the open ocean. The journey was a psychological nightmare. The sailors were practically paralyzed by fear, battling severe seasickness, scurvy, and the creeping, undeniable suspicion that their captain was a complete madman leading them to the edge of the earth. Mutiny was brewing just below the surface, a violently tense atmosphere threatening to tear the small fleet apart. Columbus desperately maintained 2 separate logbooks, falsifying the daily distances to keep his terrified men from realizing exactly how incredibly far they had traveled from home. On the night of October 11th, a sudden, desperate shout rang out from the high rigging of the Pinta. A lookout had spotted a faint, flickering light bobbing in the absolute pitch-black darkness of the horizon. By the morning of October 12th, the terrified, exhausted sailors fell to their knees, weeping as the lush, green shores of an entirely unknown island materialized out of the mist. They had made landfall in what is now known as the Bahamas. Columbus stepped onto the white sand, dramatically planted the royal flag of Spain, and completely changed the fundamental trajectory of human history. Until his dying day, he firmly believed that he had successfully reached the outer islands of Asia. He was entirely, spectacularly wrong. He had accidentally stumbled upon a massive, complex, and incredibly populated hemisphere that had been completely isolated from the rest of the planet. For tens of thousands of years, the vibrant indigenous civilizations of the Americas had developed entirely on their own, completely separated from the brutal geopolitical conflicts of Europe, Asia, and Africa. This staggering discovery violently shattered that ancient isolation. What followed was the Columbian Exchange, an absolute biological and cultural collision that completely reshaped the entire globe. Ships began ruthlessly transporting unprecedented wealth, strange new crops like potatoes and corn, and powerful, deadly beasts of burden back and forth across the ocean. But this monumental connection also unleashed an absolute, apocalyptic nightmare upon the indigenous populations. Invisible, highly lethal European diseases like smallpox and measles swept through the newly discovered continents like a devastating wildfire, erasing entire civilizations and triggering an era of brutal, unrelenting colonization. The 2 separate halves of the Earth had finally found each other, colliding with a beautiful, terrifying, and immensely destructive force. In 1492, a single voyage did not just draw a new map of the world. It gave violently painful birth to the modern, deeply interconnected, and heavily globalized world we inhabit right now.